Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Incorrect Politics. Today we are going to discuss the brand new map, which is based on the result of 2020 census. This map will determine the election map and some of the electoral votes allocation, as well as House seat for the election in 2022, 24, 26, 28, and 30. So today our main focus will be trying to see where did the parts of the country gained or lose electoral votes and congressional seats, and how this will impact the future election. And for record, today we are going to discuss a lot of things that revolves around the partisan nature of one certain state, or the leaning or the direction one state is shifting towards. And because this map is only effective from 2020 to 2030, so these discussion when we're talking about trends, we will refer to the trends that is more like under a decade basis. So the trend of last maybe 6 to 10 years. We wouldn't discuss, for example, California trended from 1980s Republican control to 2020, which is Joe Biden carried the state by more than about 30-point percentage. So that's the basis of our discussion today. So this is the newly formed electoral map. So if you want to see how many electoral votes does one state gets, you add the number of what's being shown on and plus 2. Except for District of Columbia. District of Columbia has 3 electoral votes in presidential election, but they don't have any House members in Congress. So based on this standard, you can see that, for example, New Jersey, which has a 12th number shown on it, it has 14 electoral votes in presidential election and 12 House seats. Delaware has 1 seat and 3 in electoral map. And for New York, that 27 denotes what it currently has. So it's currently under 29 electoral votes and 27 congressional seats. But next year, which will be the first time this census come into effect, New York will lose 1 congressional district, and that means 28 votes for New York in presidential election in 2024. So when it comes to seats being eliminated or seats being gained in the case of Montana or Texas, then there has to be some people who come and goes. This reconsideration process wouldn't be that difficult. Well, for example, in the state of New York, 27 seats prior to the census and 26 after, that doesn't really make that much of a difference because you can easily find one House member who wishes to retire or does not run under any circumstances. And at that case, we can just try to allocate our House members from one district to another district to avoid the loss. However, in some of the states, the behavior is much more dynamic because, for example, in the state of West Virginia, there used to be 3 House seats, now it's 2. Both 3 of them were controlled by Republicans, so actually you can expect a very heated primary, if possible, under the state of West Virginia because 3 of the House members from the state of West Virginia aren't necessarily at the age of retirement, and nor do they have any means to retire from a super safe Republican district or Republican state. But that's slightly off our topic today. Our topic today is to see the gains and losses for the 2 parties from different regions of this country. And based on this map, you can already see some easy trends. For example, most of the losses were concentrated on this upper half region, which is clearly the so-called Rust Belt region, and most of the gains were from the southern part of the region, which were the states that are in the Sun Belt region. So most of the states actually remained unchanged in terms of their electoral votes or their House seats, and that's actually a very phenomenal situation because this is one of those maps that involves a rather small changes in comparison to its predecessor. So you can actually see that this year there is only one state which gained or lost beyond 1 seat, and that is the state of Texas, as it's widely expected. So what exactly does these states trended in terms of their electoral preference? So I made this map for you. The map itself is extracted from the political website, and the bracket, which is the red ones and the blue ones, were the ones that I've added onto this map as a new entity. The red ones denotes that it's a rather safe or likely Republican state, while the blue one denotes it's a Democratic leaning or Democratic safe state. So under this standard, we only have Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Florida and Texas under consideration for 2020 to 2030 election cycle. These are the states where I believe that it will change hand in comparison to 2020. And the reason why we have to separate between those states which might be flipping and those are not is because for the ones that were not moving, there's only one math calculation needed. We just have to add up, for example, the state of Montana gained the extra electoral votes, and let's see if there's any. The Republican lost 1 vote in Ohio, lost 1 in West Virginia. So that actually means that despite people were saying that Republican parties are gaining 3 votes in their result if you look back to 2020 map applying this new census. However, Republican actually lost 1 safe vote in this new electoral map. And the reason why they were gaining so many votes in this 2020 map version of 2024 electoral map is because they gained 2 in Texas, they gained 1 in Florida, they gained 1 in North Carolina, and all 3 of these states were by no means safe state for Republican Party. So actually, there's 1 lesser vote for Republicans to take for granted, and 5 more votes that Republicans have to fight hard to gain, especially Texas. These 2 gains in Texas, well, it might seem evident that Texas is a Republican state, but as I said in my first prediction video, Texas is gradually losing its status as a red state and become more like at best, a leaning Republican state for Republicans in at least the next decade election cycle, unless something dramatic happens, or else we can easily predict that Texas could have gone to a tipping point where it's only 2 or 3 point, or even 1 point half separating between the Democratic and Republican candidate in the 2024 election, and has a possibility to flip in 2028, given that it's only a 6-point victory for President Donald Trump in 2020. So by this standard, let's calculate the Democratic's electoral vote gain as well. Oregon is 1 for Democrat, California is 1 lost for Democrat, Colorado is 1 gain for Democrat, and also there's a state of New York which is a lost for Democrat, and Illinois is a state where Democratic lost votes. So actually that's a net gain of -1 for Democrat as well. So for both Republican Party and the Democratic Party, the newly formed census electoral map were actually showing 1 electoral vote less for each party in terms of their next presidential election. So that's 2 more votes up for grabs in those battleground states. And that's actually a good thing for those who treated political as more like a sports game approach, but rather a more confusing stage for any political analysis. Because while people might say that 2 votes in comparison to 538 doesn't sound like a lot, but a lot of times 2 votes or 3 votes were enough to overturn the election history. Besides these safe Republican and safe Democratic states, how are the remaining parts of this map we're moving? Well, I also made that for you. So, by this means, the red arrow means that the state is trending rightward in comparison to previous election cycles, and blue ones were those states that's trending leftward. And by this standard, you can see that actually more of the Republican trending rightward states were on the upper half of the map, which is, coincidentally enough, another Rust Belt region. And some of the surprise gains were in the state of Nevada and the state of Florida. But the Florida one, I remain quite skeptical. As well, the other part, which is shifting leftward, that's quite expected, which is the Sun Belt region, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina. Or people might say that Colorado and New Mexico, but by my meaning and my standard, Colorado is already out of grabs for Republican because it's already an 11 to 12 point deficit for President Donald Trump against Joe Biden in 2020. New Hampshire's case in comparison, I would say it's rather unchanged, and besides, it doesn't gain or lose any electoral votes in this census, so I'm not going to discuss New Hampshire too much in this election video. So by this standard, let's take a look at how much of the states were shifting rightward and are gaining or losing electoral votes. So, Nevada, 0 for rightward shifting. Wisconsin, 0. Michigan, -1. Pennsylvania, -1. And that's -2 for rightward shift. And Florida is a +1. So actually, it's a -1 for Republicans. And for the leftward shift, Arizona didn't gain any seat, despite people predicting that Arizona is gaining a seat. Texas, 2 for Democratic shifting. And Georgia, none. North Carolina, 1 for Democratic shifting. So actually, you can see that while Democrat and Republican safe state both lost a vote for granted, in terms of the dynamic movement of this map, Republicans are actually in a much least favorable position because Republicans were losing 1 extra vote when these votes shifting were all said and done, while Democrats were actually on +3. So it means that if this thing continues to progress over time, Democrat is going to gain an additional 3 votes while the Republican is going to lose one more. So that will put the net gain difference of Republican Party and Democratic Party to 4 votes in favor of Democratic Party, instead of what people might say and predict it on other websites, which is Republican plus 3. Yes, Republican plus 3 if this map is applied to 2020 result. But this map is going to come into effect for presidential election in 2024, where these leftward shifting states will shift further to the left and the rightward state will shifting further to the right. So we must take a look at how the states were trending when we were analyzing these seats gained or changed. That's for the presidential election part. However, there's still other part of the result that we have to discuss. People were saying that the new gain and losses in these House districts is going to provoke a lot of gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is a situation where the map drawer of one certain state will drawing the map to favor or try to not favor a certain party, particularly the party that he opposes, because it's very easy to actually draw out. Imagine that my state has 40% of Republicans and 60% of Democrats, but out of some miraculous fluke, I'm a Republican and get elected a governor. If we have 3 districts, it will be rather easy to salvage one district because we can just draw the entire Republican 40% population into one district and let the other 2 be predominantly Democratic. But if we actually do some little tricks, 40% was enough because one district is 33%. So you can have 17% to have a majority in one district. Let's say if we give 20% to one district for Republicans and 13% Democrat in that district. So that will be 220 to 13 district and 10 to 33 district. That way, Republican by controlling 40% of the votes in that state would gain 2/3 of the seat in that 3-seat state. So gerrymandering is actually a true thing and can influence the political powers, and it's quite influential in past times, although recently a lot of states were actually introducing independent committee to redraw the congressional district maps. So this is the map that we've extracted from the political website. And this shows you that Republican only and Democrats only in terms of controlling the new district reform. So, for example, in the state of Oregon, the state is the trifecta for the Democratic Party. So it means that the Oregon's Democratic Party has the complete say of what district is going to look like what ways. And Oregon currently only has 1 Republican House member. And by this standard, Democrat could well be easy to draw that Republican out of the House because it's actually an easy allocation. There's 5 seats, it's actually 6 seats now for the state of Oregon. And trying to do some gerrymandering wouldn't be so hard to pinch that only Republican outside of the state, as well as they're distributing the state in a rather even manner. But Democrats are not the main gainers in this institution, and Republicans are actually the ones who are benefiting from the state control of the map redrawing. Because look at the map. Republicans will clearly control way more states in comparison to Democrats. Republican control Florida. That's 29 electoral votes in 2020, and it will become 30 electoral votes in 2024. Georgia. That's a recently flipped state won by President Biden. But Georgia is still very much a battleground state, and who controls the drawing map power in a battleground state certainly going to be in favor of retaining the majority in that state in terms of the House of Representatives, because clearly when you're playing a ball game and the referee is on your side, you can hardly win when you're given that you're about same ability as your opponents, right? And also Republican control Texas, which is another crucial state that I predicted that it's going to go super close in the future election cycles. Ohio, a big state. North Carolina, a big state. So you can see that on the Republican side, there are states that are both swing states and big states that controls a lot of electoral votes. In comparison, in Democratic side, they only have Nevada, and rather I'll say, yes, that's only Nevada. It's a Democratic swing state inside this entire map. And for the big states, New York, Massachusetts perhaps, Illinois perhaps, and Oregon perhaps. But those were already safe Democratic states, and these states only have 1 to 3 Republican House members whatsoever, so their influence on redistricting really isn't that much. At most, it's only a solidification for the Democrats in these states. But for Republicans, only the battleground states drawing rights will be able to let them hold on to these states. For example, in the state of North Carolina, which it previously had 13 congressional seats, Republicans used to control the state by 10 seats to 3 for the Democratic Party, when the state were around 50-50 for the presidential election. And that's the reason why the North Carolina state were recently ordered to redraw their map, and that map came into effect in 2018 and 2020. And that's the reason why in 2020 election, despite Republicans taking 12 seats away from the Democratic Party, but they were losing 2 seats in the state of North Carolina. So let's move on to this map, which I put all of the graphs together, and that's the main takeaway message. So for one, when we're counting the safe states, Republicans were losing 1 electoral votes for granted, and Democratic Party are also losing 1. But when we consider the trends, Republican Party are actually predicted to be losing more electoral votes in the future, while Democratic Party is projected to gain in the future election cycles. Lastly, the one salvage for Republican Party is they control a lot of the states which are battleground states or states that hold a lot of congressional seats, which will probably serve as a very important factor when they're trying to retake the House control from the Democrats in 2022 midterm election. That will be all for my video today. If you do like it, you can like, subscribe, and share to my video. And you can also comment down below for your thoughts and your prediction for 2022 House election result. As always, I'm Incorrect Politics. I'm signing out for today. Have a great one. Goodbye.